Hey guys, today we're going to talk about Richard Nixon. We had already discussed him before once in the past when he was vice president under Eisenhower. So our questions are, what is the Nixon Doctrine? How did Nixon demonstrate détente in China? And who is in the silent majority? Okay, so the Nixon administration. All right, so Nixon comes in as the 36th U.S. president. Very shy, reserved, a loner, which becomes very important later to know that about him. Not a typical politician. He would isolate himself in the White House, it says, and it was his staff's job to keep Congress, the press, even members of his own cabinet away from him. Loyal subordinates. He had two specific subordinates that were sort of his go-to guys. They will come up later. H.R. Haldeman and John Ehrlichman. Okay, famous names. Make sure you know them. They're going to take charge of the domestic issues. Sometimes they would even make decisions without even talking to Nixon. Nixon was much more passionate about foreign policy. So he's going to be, really digging into what's happening in the world and how can we make our mark. He's not so interested in domestic issues. So very, very different from his most recent predecessors. Okay, he's going to rely on Henry Kissinger, which at the time was a national security advisor, to help him through the foreign policy issues, to give him advice. And pretty much it was Kissinger and Nixon making all the foreign policy decisions for the Nixon administration. Okay, usually there's a lot more input from other people. He really distrusted everyone, and I mentioned this in the past when we discussed the Checkers scandal. That's where he starts hating on the media. Here it is again. He distrusted the media, even members of his own political party as a Republican. He really wants his own privacy, and just all this distrust leads to problems, in just a few years. Okay, a couple of pictures I want to show you. This is him. It's a pretty good picture of him, actually. So there he is, okay? And then I wanted to show you a picture of him with his aides, specifically because I wanted you to see. I can't really get him on there. There he is. All right, so this is Haldeman, okay? This is Ehrlichman. You can't see him too well there. This is Henry Kissinger. So these two guys do the domestic issues primarily, without even talking to Nixon sometimes. He didn't really have an interest. And Kissinger and Nixon work on the foreign policy. This is Henry Kissinger today. All right? So, with that said, we're going to start getting into foreign policy. So, he used Vietnamization. And this gave the South Vietnamese money, weapons, whatever, to take over the war for themselves and to contain communism. He's also going to extend this plan, and he's going to call it the Nixon Doctrine. So this is Asian allies in the future will receive our support, but without extensive ground forces. So in other words, we're going to give them a lot of money. Okay, Nixon Doctrine. So we're going to give them support, financial support, but we're not going to send in ground troops. And there it says they have to take responsibility for themselves and maintaining their own peace. He is staunch anti-communist, but, this is a big but here, he and Kissinger came up with a new plan to thaw out relations between us and our communist foes. All right, and it says they didn't believe that the world should be both superpowers confronting one another, us and the bear of the Soviet Union, risking world war. But they do want to contain communism. So don't think, when I teach you more of this in just a second, don't think that Nixon was any way pro-communist. Not at all. But they thought that having these two superpowers constantly on edge all the time wasn't good for world relations. All right, so they come up with something very famous called détente. And it's deliberate reduction of Cold War tension, especially between us and the Soviet Union. And there'll be some other countries added there, but we were the two big superpowers at the time, as you know, going way back to the Second Red Scare. So it says we're going to try to build a better relationship with our main rivals in the interest of world peace. Okay, so I want to show you this. This is how you can remember it. Bear with me. Okay, so it would be like having a piece of ice. See, we're already dripping. And taking a flame to it. Okay, so basically, you see it drips faster now. And that's pretty much what they're going to do. They're going to use detente. They are going to bring a flame to this Cold War tension and cause there to be a lot of thawing out between us and the Soviet Union. In other words, we're going to kind of make nice with them. All right. We also are going to do that in China. So first, I want to show you Brezhnev and Nixon. So Nixon is going to invite the Soviet Premier Brezhnev to the United States. And here they're having a meeting, and they're probably about to have a press photo op or whatever. And here is the interpreter, and they're discussing. All right. So that was a huge deal that Brezhnev came to the United States. Another example of detente. All right, and then let me finish this with China, and I'll show you some more pictures. It says, since 1949, when communists took over power in China, we had refused to recognize the communist government there. Instead, we recognized the exiled regime on the island of Taiwan as the Chinese government. We have talked about that before in the past. It was one lesson. Hopefully you remember that. All right, so Nixon is going to set out to just change his policy with Kissinger. And those two go about secret negotiations with the Chinese, which ends in Nixon announcing he would visit China in February of 1972. Unprecedented. No American president had ever been to China. So, and, visited as a president. So this is really, really shocking the world. That's what it says here. The leader, the communist leader, Mao Zedong, he will meet with him in Beijing. And it says, Nixon's quoted as saying, let us start a long march together, not in lockstep, but on different roads leading to the same goal, the goal of building a world structure of peace and justice. People couldn't believe this. It said he hoped this visit would ease tensions between us and China and the USSR. And he was right. It did help. So a couple of pictures of that. Here's Mao Zedong with President Nixon, and this was once Nixon arrived in China. And then here's another one of Nixon touring China. I've got him cut off. Hold on. There he is. And this is, you can see in the background, the Great Wall of China wrapping around here, and pictures that they were taking on their tour. Okay, and these pictures are going to be published in the newspaper. And again, folks cannot believe that American president is in China. So certainly there's a thawing out there. All right, meanwhile, the Soviets, because of all this niceness we're showing, they agreed to an American-Soviet summit. And this is going to be May of 1972. Nixon flies to Moscow, becomes the first president since World War II to visit there. While he's there, he and Brezhnev signed SALT. Okay. SALT 1. So this is how you can remember. Okay, see my SALT? 1, SALT 1, SALT 1, got it? 1, SALT. Okay, SALT 1. So SALT 1 is Strategic Arms Limitation Treaty. In other words, we're going to reduce our amount of proliferation of weapons. So it says ballistic missiles. You'll also see it written as ICBM, Intercontinental Ballistic Missile. Okay, so we're going to reduce that, freeze that, or limit. Both sides are going to limit the amount of ICBMs that we produce. And this was a sign that we're not going to continue this massive buildup of weapons that we've been doing over the years, and we've discussed that since the Cold War began in the 50s, that we are going to actually reduce our number of weapons that we are building up. Okay. So with that, I do have a picture here. This is Brezhnev and Nixon signing SALT 1. And I also have a really, really cool cartoon. All right, this is actually, I don't know if I can move it over. Yeah, this is really cool because it's showing the long arm of the SALT Treaty, Strategic Arms Limitation. And then it's showing the whole world is in the hands of this treaty. And if you kind of notice, there's movement, it seems, in the picture. So like as if it's a ball and the long arm of SALT is bouncing the world up and down. And the idea was, without SALT, there is no hand to catch the world. And we're all goners in a nuclear war that takes out everybody. All right, so it was really seen as a great idea. Okay, Nixon's going to announce the SALT Treaty, and I want to show you that really quickly. Okay. Sorry.
Arms have been deadlocked for over a year. As a result of negotiations involving the highest level of both governments, I am announcing today a significant development in breaking the deadlock. The statement that I shall now read is being issued simultaneously in Moscow and Washington. Washington, 12 o'clock, Moscow, 7 p.m. The governments of the United States and the Soviet Union, after reviewing the course of their talks on the limitation of strategic armaments, have agreed to concentrate this year on working out an agreement for the limitation of the deployment of anti-ballistic missile systems, ABMs. They have also agreed that together with concluding an agreement to limit ABMs, they will agree on certain measures with respect to the limitation of offensive strategic weapons. The two sides are taking this course in the conviction that it will create more favorable conditions for further negotiations to limit all strategic arms.
Okay, so that was huge. I mean, they're going to limit all strategic arms. That was the idea eventually. Okay, big deal. All right, this thawing out after the Cold War. This goes back to détente. SALT is a great example of that. All right, so domestic policy. I told you he wasn't as interested in that. Congress does approve of Nixon's revenue sharing plan that really Ehrlichman and Haldeman kind of come up with, or new federalism. And the idea was to shift responsibility from so much welfare programs on the federal government to state and local levels. And Congress is going to give those local governments a lot of money here, $30 billion in block grants over 5 years to meet those needs. He thought we should limit the size of federal government and give responsibility to the states, where it was before the New Deal. This is a great example of political partisanship, where you have this Republican who's more recent in our history, more like the current Republican Party, trying to limit the size of government. This, of course, New Deal from FDR. Okay, so it says we have a recession hit in the 1970s. Stagflation slows down everything, high inflation. Nixon has to impose a 90-day wage and price freeze. He received only 42% of the popular vote in '68, and he thought he needed to broaden the Republican base, appealing to all the voters who were mad at the anti-war protesters, black militants, counterculture. He called them the silent majority. Okay? And then he tried to win over the South by asking federal courts there to delay integration plans and busing orders, and nominated 2 Southern conservatives to the court. So he's kind of promoting, in a way, segregation to try to lure over the South, and this becomes known as his Southern strategy. Okay, so let's go back to our essential questions. And what is the Nixon Doctrine? Okay, so make sure you can answer the Nixon Doctrine. Remember, down here it said, basically Asian allies are going to receive our funding, but not our troops. How did Nixon demonstrate détente in China? Well, he goes and visits there, for one, and he tours the country, and obviously this makes other people in the world, other leaders, think that we are calming down our communist fears, and it really gets the attention of the Soviet Union. And then, who is in the silent majority? So I thought this would be the best way to help you remember that.